All right, everyone, we're back here for our next segment on PALS TV. Next, we're going to be coming to you live from Gallia County. Well, actually, right across the river in Mason County, I believe it is, West Virginia. But there is so much history down in that area, and we've had wonderful lessons the past few weeks from Ed. And I think last week was absolutely amazing with going into the sayings and where they originated from. I'm really looking forward to this week's segment. We have Dave and Brooke stepping in and going to kind of walk you through some murals down there, and something that when I first went to that area, I was immediately interested in. Thought it was absolutely fascinating. So I'm sure you will as well. So live from Gallia County, we have Brooke and Dave.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Point Pleasant, West Virginia, here on the river that's right between Gallia County and Mason County. I'm actually Ed Cromley's daughter. So I'm a native of Point Pleasant. And so this wall and history mean a lot to me too. Actually, where we are right now is in front of the Ohio River. We're going to talk about the Ohio River and the Kanawha Rivers today and what those mean and some of the history behind that as well. They connect, they mingle, and they actually join right here at the point in Point Pleasant. Now this area is rich in history, and we're going to go back to its very first days, the frontier days, where we see on this beautiful wall, we have a mural here that spans 150 feet. This covers a flood wall, this mural, and it actually is about 15 to 18 feet high. This is by a world-renowned artist named Robert Dafford. He was hired to come and work on this wall. He really dove into the history of the area to make sure everything was really as correct as he could make it and as real life as it could possibly be. He did have some assistants, but really about 3 to 4 people did all of this wall. The paint that you see here actually came from Germany, and it is built to last for about 100 years. So we'll see if that happens, but right now it's holding up really well. So we're going to start with Indian life. The actual Indian tribe that was here in this area at the time were the Shawnee and the Mingo tribes. So we're going to see a little bit about their life. It just shows their way of living. They were under huts they made out of trees. They did things with grass and weaved a lot of things together. You'll see necklaces made out of corn husks. Here they're working together doing some items that they could make for trading. That's the way of life at that time, was to trade things. You'll see the detail here in the wall. Over here we've got some hunters. You come up this way. Coming back in, we caught them some things, shot some things that they're going to cook for dinner later.
Rabbit.
Yep, a rabbit. We've got some sort of bird here. This guy's really dressed fully. No, this is what they wore, right? They wore gear that covered their legs as they were going out into the fields. But they also were really hot, and they didn't want to have to deal with all of the clothing either. Now the women were working on gardening. This kind of reminds me of right now. You know, we have access to food still, but at the same time, would we be able to survive? Could we make our own foods and make sure that we could supply food to our families? This is something that the women's job was, to work in the fields and to plant some things and also use the corn here for food, but other things as well.
We know here they're planting corn.
Yes.
And then down there they're planting squash.
I love squash.
Which you guys will get to see Monday.
Yeah. Talk about
the Rankin segment.
That's right. Look at the detail in the painting of the forest and the trees. And, you know, at this point, things had not been, the ground, the land was untouched, which was how Indian native life wanted it. They felt like the earth was a giver, and so they treated it really well, and they tried not to take from the earth unless it was given. So they're just minding their own business, living their own life here, the Shawnee and the Mingo tribes. We'll see some more down this way of things they were making.
My dog.
Puppies resting. Here are their huts that they made out of a lot of grass. Some of this would be if they killed like a bigger animal, and then they would dry out the skin, and then they would overlay their huts with those as well. These were, of course, dirt floors. This is where they would reside, live, function from. Most of the huts had places that they would prepare their food outside. You can see here a fire pit and some ways that they were making some of their foods. They used a lot of tools to make and bend wood to the way that they would want it to be. Some of these things are actually used in combat. They're oh, I don't know what you call them, like, but just a hard husk type. Because you'll find out later that the first battle that this covers, the first battle of the American Revolution, the Battle of Point Pleasant, was a hand-to-hand fight. So we're not talking, when we think of war, we think of you over there and us over here. In this war, and it depicts in this picture, so you'll really get to see it, they were hand-on-hand fighting. Can you imagine being this close to the person that you were fighting, face-to-face and hand-to-hand? You'll see some of those pictures in a little bit. If you have questions along the way, feel free to raise your hand or ask those, and Jonah will let you come on and ask your questions, or you can type them in. And here we're coming up to kind of like the main camp quarters. And here's your younger fit men who were going to be battling, who were going to be those who protected the camp. I don't think they knew necessarily they were battling, but they were always going to be fighting for their land. They felt like this was theirs. So they're going to fight for their land. They're going to make sure that it's protected. So this would be like a meeting place, a headquarters for them. And here they've got some different items they're laying out and cleaning and getting prepared, making sure that things are taken care of. The women were still cooking and pulling things together. Look at the detail on the wall. I mean, this is very realistic of the time. More huts, more life, more camp life. Here they are grinding corn. I don't know about you guys, but back here you can see, you know, you can come up with a game no matter where you are, right? They're playing a game here. Probably got some young teenage boys hanging out and saying, how can we hit a ball? How can we be active and compete, right? They're back here competing and on teams, having a good time. I'm wanting to get a nose ring. Here was the first nose ring. David, you gonna let me get one? Okay, they're working the corn here. One of my favorite shots, because my boys love reptiles and outdoors things, but right here's a tortoise or turtle this little boy brought to his mama. And what they're thinking right now is, I can make this into like a little mini purse almost. Like this shell, I can make that into something. They were very resourceful of the land. How many of you have seen moms carrying babies on their front or on their back, right? They've got these nice slings you pay like $150 for. Look here, this mama carrying her baby on their back. They made their own shoes. Some of them aren't wearing shoes, but these were made out of different skin of animals that had been dried out and then conformed to fit the foot. And actually that kind of leather from an animal hide could really even stretch with the person. So they were very, they could use them for years to come. And here we've got a kind of how they build the huts that they were living in. They used the mud to their advantage, using that like a stucco, like a stick for them, almost like cement. Some more people working on their cooking here. And then a lot of them to wear all their jewelry, and they made it all handmade. You even see the guys wearing different feathers and necklaces, beads. corn, things they would find to use. So this is all before the colonists came. This is life pre-colonists coming to the area. Coming up too, you're going to see how they stretched different things. Like this right here could be the bottom of the huts that you saw. It can also be used as a raft. This can be weaved together so they can make a roof top as well. All very resourceful ways to use the land and what it gave to them. And one reason they would settle at a river spot would have been what? They have access to water, of course. They have access to moving things down and up a river.
Kind of like that barge.
Yep, right here. We've got it in action. So still to this day, this has become a place of where you could use the river to actually get things from point A to point B. And this is something in this area that's actually a job for a lot of people, to be a boat hand, to be a deck hand. So little did they know that this river, which was of course smaller back then, would turn into something we use today. Here they are using the stretching I was telling you about of animal hide, animal skins. So they would hang it and they would stretch it, they would pull it. So you can see them pulling on it. This little guy brought in, he said, "Dad, can I have the head?" Let me go play with that. He's got his machete. They've got their man purses down here, their merces.
Tactical bag.
Tactical bag, okay, yeah. Here they are working on and building and making canoes. These were made out of trees that they would hollow out. This is another way that they were very ingenious in using what was already here, what was indigenous to this area. They would then use it and say, you know, Mother Nature or God gave us this land, so we're going to use it. And that's why they were so protective over their land. Little did they know what was lurking next. So here's the river of that time, of that day. These guys are fishing. They've kind of even built themselves a little dam here out into, so that they could trap and have a little bit more of a advantage on getting some of the fish to stop here so they can grab them. They stab them mostly, like a javelin there.
Spear there.
Yep, spear, okay. So they would use rocks to actually make the wood into shapes that they wanted it to be in. So they would sharpen a spear or even their weapons. This guy's got a turkey. So now we're coming up on the part of the wall where it's mostly just wooded area. This is in downtown Point Pleasant, so there's an area too for people to stop, and this is a restaurant area. We're going to take you out towards the river to resume the wall, because what's coming next is the battle. So we're getting close to October of 1774. So let's go this way and check out the river. I was going to tell you about the river some. The river this is the Ohio, and coming up on our left, it's going to jet in, is the Kanawha. So the Kanawha comes down from Kanawha County, which is Charleston, West Virginia. So when the Kanawha comes into the Ohio, those two rivers meet. And the state park that is joins to these murals is called Tewindawi. and that is a Native American Indian term that actually means mingling of the waters. So that's why it's called Tewindewi. That's where the 2 points meet. Now, George Washington also surveyed this area and was here, and he is known for naming Point Pleasant by saying he was looking over the river and said, "This is a pleasant point." So they started calling it Point Pleasant. All right, so now we're on the other side of the wall here. So we're starting again with, now you can see some of the colonists have come to the area. The British are scoping out. They're coming in, and they're starting to take over, right? They're cutting down some trees and just sort of acting like it's their own land. So the Indians aren't real thrilled with that.
So right about this point here is when the two cultures start to clash here.
Right.
Where you have the settlers coming in and chopping down the trees, hunting all the animals, taking all the fish.
I'll read you a little bit about Lord Dunmore's war. It says here, was a focal point in Western history. Here were gathered in either wing of the army the men who, by dint of daring enterprise, had made their way to the frontier and had carried American institutions across the Appalachian barrier. Here, in a pitched battle, they met and subdued nearly an equal number of the most redoubtable of their foes. From Point Pleasant and Camp Charlotte, they scattered far and wide to fight the coming battle for independence. Some of the shores of the Atlantic, some in the forests of the Southwest, others in the prairies of the Illinois. The victory at Point Pleasant opened an ever-lengthening pathway to Western settlement. Thenceforward, new vigor was infused into the two chief forces of the future century. So we're talking about, can these two coexist? Can they work together? This is actually a replica of Fort Randolph, which was a place where we can still visit today. It looks very similar to this. I think we're going to do a tour of Fort Randolph coming up in a few weeks. But this was a place that was built so that the British could have a barrier, so that they could overlook, so they could come up those walls, they could shoot their cannons, they could shoot their guns, but also have that protective barrier. So you have the Indians outside the wall and the colonists inside. We'll talk more about that later. So in the beginning of them mingling in these areas, they were trying to figure out ways that they could get along. Now, shooting like someone would not have been the best way, but they started figuring out that the Indians liked things. And so they would come together, here's the British, with the Indians, and they would bring all of their things that they could trade. So they started trying to figure out ways they could keep peace. We will bring you supplies, shoes, some things you might use for cooking, and they would bring other things with them. So they started a bartering system at this point to try to see if this was a way that they could keep peace with one another. And at certain times it worked, and certain times it didn't. Even if someone gave you something, if they wanted to tear into your land, you probably still would defend it. So this is where they're starting out. Now, the Shawnee were led by Chief Cornstalk. So he was their chief at the time, Chief Cornstalk, the Shawnee Indians.
Ready to get down there?
Yes, now we're gonna, they're still like just starting to take over. You can see just things are changing. You can see a shift in the land, and even the colors that Robert Dafford used kind of was showing something was coming. You know, we have all these vibrant colors of life and what the world was looking like in the land, and then it starts to kind of dim on us here. But also we're heading into October, right? We're heading into October because October 14th, 1774, October 10th, 1774 is the date of this battle that we're talking about, the Battle of Point Pleasant.
So you can see here where all the trees that used to be up on the hills are getting chopped down. You see all the stumps.
Yes. And this is starting to infuriate the Shawnees. They're trying to figure out a way to coexist, but not necessarily going as well as they planned.
This looks like a little bit of a dispute right here too, doesn't it?
Yes.
Okay. Get shot over there. That's the Mothman.
Yeah.
Downtown statue of the Mothman.
Right past that clock. Okay, so this is the depiction of the battle. So here we are. And this is what I was talking about, that it was hand to hand. Now, I'll tell more about exactly what happened, but here you'll see whenever an Indian or a Native American during the battle would die, they would take their brother and they would put them in the river instead of just leaving them here in the land. So as many as they could, they would take them into the water so that they would be at one with the earth. And if they left them here, they wouldn't know if they'd be able to come back and get them. So they would take them to the water if they could. So you're seeing them in combat here. There was about 1,000 militiamen. They were led by Colonel Andrew Lewis. They were the Virginia militia. And, you know, one of the first casualties in the battle was Charles Lewis. And that was actually Andrew, Colonel Andrew's brother. And he managed to make his way back to their camp, the British camp, where he told his brother, the commanding officer, Andrew, that he was dying, but that he needed to get out there. He then went back to his tent and he did just that. He died. The other commander, John Fleming, was wounded twice in the arm and once in the chest. And he too made it back to camp where he tended to his wounds, but then he later died. Outnumbered by Cornstalk's army and without their commanders, the Virginians began to fall back. So at first, it looked like the Indians were winning. The Native Americans they knew the area better and they were more prepared. And the Virginians only had about half of what they needed. And so whenever he was warned, Lewis was warned, he sent in reinforcements and he began to even out the numbers. So Cornstalk's attack was stalled near where the railroad trestle is in Point Pleasant still today. And most of the frontier battles were brief at that time, but the Battle of Point Pleasant actually lasted a whole day, which is a very long time for those day battles. So during this time period, a battle would last less than an hour and it would be over. But the Battle of Point Pleasant actually lasted all day. It started out a foggy day, and they started out that morning. The Indians used that to their advantage. It was a cover for them to sneak in. They were very smart and they knew their land. So that's how they kind of got the first win of the day. But then as it escalated and Colonel Lewis sent in more reinforcements, they began to even out the numbers. It was a really lengthy battle, like a whole day battle, and it was hand-to-hand fighting. There were records of Indians actually running right up to the barrels of the men that were fighting. Cornstalk was even walking back and forth behind his warriors, encouraging them, telling them keep things up, that it was a fantastic fight, and encouraging them to continue fighting. The tide of this battle turned actually when Lewis sent in a large group of men along a creek. So he basically flanked them. This is one of the first times we see this. He sent his men to this area along a creek that led behind the hills outside of Point Pleasant. And from there, the men took the top of the hill near a notch in the crest, and they began firing down into the native army's flank. Chief Cornstalk, knowing from his scouts that William Christian's force was still on its way, he knew more was coming. He believed that this was just too much. Faced with the fire on two fronts, behind him and in front of him, and knowing that his men were exhausted after hours of an intense battle that usually only took 1 hour or less, Cornstalk and his men were forced to retreat back across the Ohio River. So here they are, and they're going to retreat, and actually to somewhere probably familiar to some of you. His hometown was the Chillicothe area. So they ended up retreating, the Shawnees that were left, to the Chillicothe area. Lewis held the field and won the Battle of Point Pleasant, but at a terrible cost for that time. Even though, yes, they won, he had suffered more than 200 casualties, 75 dead, and out a force of no more than 1,000 men. So there were 1,000 of them, 275 dead. And their names are recorded on a monument where I was telling you in that state park called Tewindawi, where the mingling of the waters happens of the Kanawha and the Ohio River. The Native American, the Native, like the Indians Army, is not really sure how many losses they had. Their force pulled out most of their dead, I was telling you, and carried them off, either off the battlefield or into the river. They had high intensity and a length of fighting, as well as inside their militiamen, but they were likely to suffer quite a number of casualties. It was definitely a large number. So essentially, Cornstalk went home to lick his wounds and to try to regain just a little sense of how they can defend themselves. His allies were gone, his way of life was at risk, and this gave his remaining warriors just a simple choice. So Cornstalk basically looks at his warriors and he says, let's just kill all the men, women, children, and fight till we're dead. They said they didn't want to do that. So Cornstalk said, okay, I'll go and make peace. And he goes to meet with Lord Dunmore, who was the governor at the time of Virginia. And after the treaty was signed, Dunmore himself had to go to Andrew Lewis, who was preparing to continue the fighting, and tell him that the war was actually over. The Treaty of Camp Charlotte, signed several days after the Battle of Point Pleasant, officially ended Lord Dunmore's war. And the terms made the Ohio Valley tribes surrender all land south of the Ohio River and turn over their captives and not attack whites in the area. So this was a hard pill to swallow. But after the defeat at Point Pleasant, Chief Cornstalk was committed to keeping peace. One thing that seems evident is that Cornstalk had his fill of violence at this point, and you can see why. Sadly, his commitment to maintaining the shaky peace, the Battle of Point Pleasant, would eventually lead to Cornstalk's death. Okay, so you guys have watched this part of the wall, the mural, and we're going to come up on Chief Cornstalk here. This is a replica, a statue of Chief Cornstalk, and then so he is the leader of the Native American tribe. And then this is General Andrew Lewis. So he is for the British. So we've got the colony leader, and we've got the Native American leader, Chief Cornstalk. Chief Cornstalk was a prominent leader of the Shawnee Nation just prior to the American Revolution. And his name actually translates loosely to stalk of corn. No surprise there, right? Cornstalk opposed the European settlement right here in the Ohio River. And he later became such an advocate for peace after the Battle of Point Pleasant. His murder happened by the American militiamen at Fort Randolph. Remember, we told you about the fort that we will show you in coming weeks. And that is where Chief Cornstalk's murder occurred. It was at Fort Randolph during a diplomatic visit. He was there on trying to make amends. So it was a diplomatic visit with the Virginians. And that is when his murder actually happened in November of 1777. That's a little bit about Chief Cornstalk.
And there's a mural with that, isn't there? Okay,
Yes.
we'll go back to that one.
Historians believe that he may have been born in present-day Pennsylvania, but he was resided in Ohio near modern-day Chillicothe. All right, let me find my information about General Lewis. Colonel Andrew Lewis was in the command of about 1,000 men, and he was part of a planned two-pronged Virginian invasion right here that we just described. As Lewis's force made their way down the Kanawha River, guided by their trapper, Matthew Arbuckle, Lewis anticipated linking up with another force, that was the other force that was coming, of Lord Dunmore, who was planning to march into the Ohio Valley and force the indigenous inhabitants to accept the Ohio River boundary. They negotiated the treaty at that fort. The Shawnee, however, had not been consulted in the treaty. They didn't know that they were supposed to join in on that. So he had very few allies. Okay. So now life is going to start showing us that the British had won, and they're starting to settle their land. So now they're cutting down trees and they're making other things out of them. And they've got horses, and they're doing some other more modern things, you might say, for that time. You can kind of just see the difference in the first part of our wall and now here where we find ourselves. There's definitely a lot more clothing on these people.
So they're this is the exact same area that you saw at the beginning of this segment where the Native Americans were living their lives and how they lived them, and now you're seeing what the settlers, how they lived, how they've changed the area. It's the exact same place.
Now, I know Jonah's kind of into these little pieces of information, and some of you will really like this, but Chief Cornstalk, right as he was getting ready to be murdered at Fort Randolph, was said to have put a curse on Point Pleasant. And so that is why when things happen here, they call it Chief Cornstalk's curse. So we even believe that the Mothman is part of that. A bridge fell here. The Silver Bridge actually fell in Point Pleasant, and that was said to be a part of the curse of Chief Cornstalk. They said that he put this curse on this area. So that was one of his last things that he said, that there will be a curse on Point Pleasant. This is a statue of Lord Dunmore. And David's gonna laugh, but I'm gonna do this, okay? So to commemorate
Oh my.
yes, to commemorate battle days in Point Pleasant, they have a festival every year, of course, and there's reenactors that come, and they had a Miss Battle Days pageant, and I'm the first Miss Battle Days.
Is it Miss Battle Axe?
No, Miss Battle Days. And so at the time, once you won Miss Battle Days, you went on to a state pageant, and you had to do some sort of advertisement for your festival, trying to get people to come. So I'm going to do my little 30-second commercial. Ready? Ready? Okay. Listen, my children, and you shall hear of the midnight ride of Paul Revere. The redcoats were coming, and Paul lit out to warn the people with the shout, "The British are coming, we have to fight." And he rode off into the night. But go back 6 months to 74 and look at a battle called Lord Dunmore's War. It was the very first battle, and I'm the first queen. Come visit my festival and see what I mean. I'm Miss Battle Days, and I'm proud to represent Point Pleasant in this historical event. So this is leading up to the Revolutionary War. So we are proudly in Point Pleasant excited to say that we believe this was the first battle in the American Revolution, and that's why we acclaim that Lord Dunmore's War was the very first battle.
So then here's a map. So this map is the 1774 map of what this area looked like in southern Ohio. Let's see here. There's Point Pleasant right there.
So the lines with X's are the route that Colonel Lewis took, and then the lines with dots is the map representing how Lord Dunmore came. This is the routes that were taken through the wilderness by the Virginians to meet up with the Native Confederation. Now we're getting more into, we're going to eventually come up on George Washington surveying the area and getting into that settlement part. You know, one interesting thing my dad told me last night was actually they were looking at making Point Pleasant the capital of the next colony, and they were going to call it Vandalia. So the colony was going to include Kentucky and West Virginia, a little bit of Ohio, And Point Pleasant would have been the seed, the capital of that colony, and they were going to call it Vandalia. So here we're working with salt, we're building some more things, we're getting a little more modern. Here we've got the doctor and
Getting some surgery or
yeah.
something there.
Probably something going on. Canteens. We've got some livestock now coming on the scene. Some cows, pigs. And this is so nice in person. Like, we wish you guys could even come to Point Pleasant and just experience it on a day when maybe it's not as rainy. Detecting more batteries.
What's this right here about?
I think they're rising up.
So this would be, it looks like it's the start of the clash between the settlers and the British right here.
No more taxes, the Stamp Act. The Tea Party there. Tea Party. All the tea going in. And then we come to a blank wall. This is what the wall actually looks like without all this beautiful art on it. And eventually there will be connection here. So it takes time and effort and money. So that'll be the next section of the wall. There's a little bit more down here. It shows like a winter scene of what a winter was like during that time. Madame Bailey is down there. We could do a segment on her. She was a rough, tough lady for sure. So does anyone have any questions? I don't know if we can answer them or not, but we'll definitely take them. Gonna go under the shelter.
Yeah, let's get in the shelter.
Maybe up here we can show the river.
Can't pick it up from there.
So you can see this bridge is going over to Gallia. PALS Gallia location is actually just right beyond that.
On the other side of that bridge is PALS facility in Gallia County. We can hear the barges every morning.
Actually,
And
what you're looking at here,
just about right where that railroad bridge right there is where the Silver Bridge stood that fell in 1967. Claimed the lives of 47 people, I think.
Yeah.
Some they never found.
I mean, there's even been said someone saw the Mothman under the bridge at the time, and red eyes.
Yeah.
That was part of watching that happen.
And then the backdrop here, you look right there's the historic Low Hotel. And that is about the conclusion of our tour. So
Definitely one of my favorite places in Ohio.
yeah.
Every time I'm down there, I try to go across the river because I love history and there's just so much. We're very lucky to have the very first Miss Battle Days with us here today.
I should have worn my crown and my sash.
Right?
That's another segment.
Brooke, I have to know, did you recite that whole thing by memory?
Yeah.
Yeah. I practice so much, you know, that I just have it in my mind. So, yeah.
So impressive. Now we see where it comes from every single Tuesday. Tune in. So.
That's right.
So thank you guys. That was fantastic. I
Thank you.
got a personal tour before, but that's even better there. So very well done. Next, everyone, we're going to be heading over to Heath, Ohio. Join our friends there for a little bit of fun during our lunch hour. Mix it up. So come back and join us here shortly, live from Heath. So thanks, Brooke and Dave. You were great.
Thank you.